Data breach, cyber attack, natural disaster, they're all examples of a crisis. And research shows that businesses are likely to face a crisis at some point, yet less than half have a crisis management plan. I mean, too busy doing other things, right? Leaving them stranded when things go pear-shaped. Minister Agnes is a crisis management expert and will be the keynote speaker at a latest crisis prevention conference with Crisis X, who's here to explain now how to prepare for the ugly, for the very ugly, for when it goes pear-shaped. Melissa, lovely to see you. Welcome along.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you deal in crisis?
I do.
Your life is always in crisis?
No, because I'm crisis ready.
Okay. So a business facing crisis, getting ready, needs to do what?
A couple basic things to begin is understand what your high-risk scenarios are, so your most likely high-impact incidents, and then understand the difference between an issue and a crisis. Crisis for one organization does not necessarily translate into a crisis for another. So when does a negative event occur? And just because a negative event goes viral, so for example on social, doesn't necessarily make it a crisis.
Now, is that because it's only on social?
No, that's because it doesn't necessarily threaten long-term material impact on the organization. That's what you want to look for.
Is a crisis when you start losing money or you start losing people?
When you have the potential to do that, yeah.
And how do you stop that? I mean, how can you pick all the crises that might come your way? I mean, you can scenario build, but how do you say, now I might just, you prepare for earthquakes and all that sort of thing, and have your water and your baked beans and everything in the cupboard. But how do you prepare for cyber attacks? And how do you prepare for attacks on reputation?
Yep. So everything can potentially threaten reputation. Defining issue versus crisis, first step. So what does that mean for your organization? Then every single organization has a set of high-risk scenarios that you're most likely to encounter or you're most prone or vulnerable to. Understanding what those are, so identifying what those are. And then, so for example, cybersecurity. Large organizations especially go through cybersecurity incidents every week. That's a natural occurrence. But what's the threshold as to when that needs to be escalated because it potentially threatens that long-term material impact? Understanding that.
What happens if you've given really poor service and there's all these outages in your network and you can't get something to the people and they have paid for it and they expect it, and suddenly there's a campaign against you to cut and run from that organisation? How do you stop that?
Don't do it in the first place. Why are you giving poor service?
But it happens.
It does happen. A big part of being crisis ready is looking at the culture. Do you put people first? Because business is about relationships. Crisis management is about maintaining, strengthening those relationships when you're put to the test.
Are we ready in New Zealand? I mean, you've come here to speak at the conference. What will you say to New Zealand businesses? Are we crisis ready?
So that is a big general question for every business as individual. So obviously, yes, absolutely. Some are yes, and some probably can use some strengthening. But just knowing that there are risks that you're vulnerable to, and even just going through a stakeholder mapping and saying who are the people who matter to our business, and in the event of any type of negative event, what do they expect of us?
People that pay the bills.
Well, what do they expect of us? What do they expect communication? How will they expect that communication? What are the questions that we can anticipate that will matter to them that we can aim to be able to respond to in the timeline that they expect us to respond to it?
My biggest advice to New Zealand to us to avoid crises is to vote National at the next election. But that's aside. Do you think that what do you say of those people that always buy into this power of positive thinking? Because it sounds like people should actually think a bit negatively from time to time.
Power of positive thinking is a good thing, but what are you doing with that, right? So we can hope that luck is not a strategy in business. That's not a strategy. So power of positive thinking, great, but you still have risks. You still have vulnerabilities. How prepared are you to prevent the preventable and then be ready for the unpreventable? And the thing is, and it's the way that my brain works, I see risk everywhere. Then from that, instinctively, I see mitigation strategies for those risks, and then opportunity through the mitigation. And that's that beautiful threshold of when we prevent the preventable, when we're ready for the unpreventable, then there's this world of positive thinking opportunity that stems from that.
I see risk everywhere as well.
You would make one hell of an opening batsman in Test cricket.
Yeah. You wouldn't play
career.
You wouldn't play any of the balls. That's the problem. Hey, I appreciate your time on the program, Minister.
Thank you so much for having me.
Crisis management expert.